Hey everybody, this is Al with El Rey Collection. Hope everything's going well in your life. It's been a crazy time in the soccer market. I get tons of emails, questions. Should I buy this? Is this good pricing given the very rapid bounce back we've seen in especially Messi, the 71 bis, but also pretty much every other one of his rookies, and as a follow-on, many other soccer cards, including CR7s, and just a lot of other cards, really, frankly, almost, well, I don't want to say all things, but most things. So, what I decided to do instead of just share my feelings, I decided to dive into the data, take a look at this pretty closely, and just share some of my realizations, learnings. In some ways, it begets further questions, but regardless, I'll just kind of get started here. And I think this will be a pretty good way to look at it. Or maybe, yeah, I guess this is probably fun. Okay, so basically, what I'm trying to do here is say, hey, are the elite soccer rookies, and the ones I'm going to principally talk about are the Messi 71 bis and the CR7 mega cracks, cheap even at current prices. And I think that the answer and some of the data may surprise some of you. But before we kind of get into that, so to speak, let's see if we can um, go here. I don't know why. Okay. I need to go through this. If you can, pause your screen, read this as a exempt registered investment advisor with the SEC. I am not in the business of giving investment advice. So, anytime that I talk about anything, it's really just kind of meant to be a fun, a very fun view of how I see the market. You should not follow any of the advice in here or any of the data. Do your own research. Please look to make investments, all investments, quite carefully. Okay. So again, this is meant to be fun, and it's meant to make us think. I think that one of the key things that I'm using in this analysis is the concept of a market cap. And for those of you who are not like financial kind of consultants or have been through that type of training, let me just say at the simplest point, what the market cap tries to do is it tries to um, make an equilibrium between population of an item and the price of the item. And so let me give an example. Sometimes a stock could trade for an individual share could trade for $20,000, and another stock could trade for $2,000 or $2 even. And the company behind those particular stocks could have the exact same value, or the one with the $2 could actually be worth more than the one with 2,000 or 20,000. Why? It all comes down to the number of shares outstanding. And so just when you see the sticker price of a card being sold, you can't necessarily just assume that, wow, that one's overpriced or underpriced. You always need to calibrate into how many are there to have an idea of what all of the cards are worth. And then that provides the basis for which you can, on a relative basis, compare one to another, because you normalize for the populations, right? So, in general, that's what I'll do in a lot of these. So what that basically entails is looking at all the tens and multiplying by that price, all the nines, multiplying by that price, the 8.5s, the sevens, all the way down to authentics. And that'll give us a market cap for a particular card. So all the data in here comes from 9/28/25, which is basically last week at this point. And I'll show you in the appendix some adjustments have been made, and I put those in green specifically for things that matter. And I'll actually I do some sensitivities on some of this stuff. I'm only going to use PSA pops. which does distort the data. For some cards, let's think about the 71 bis for Messi. About half of the total population, the total population is about 1,800, 900 are in PSA holders. And for Mantle, only two-thirds are, two-thirds are in PSA. So effectively, that means that this analysis will give more weight and more market cap to Mantle because two-thirds of his cards are in PSA holders versus versus only half of Messi. So there's going to be some wobbles in the data. It just becomes much more difficult when you expand this through all the other grading companies. And certain ones, for instance, Mantle will have more SGC and Messi will have more BGS just because the nature of SGC being vintage versus BGS being more modern. So, and then sometimes there was no data on a specific grade at Card Ladder, and so I had to kind of extrapolate. So you'll see again in the appendix some purple cells where I do those extrapolations. And then there's certain inconsistencies in the data, because of the lag or because certain grades haven't sold. And so what will happen in some of those cases is, a PSA Messi Mundi Chromo has a lower price than a PSA 6 in the data. So I didn't normalize those things, but you're just going to have to trust me when you do, all of this shakes out and the conclusions don't really change. I'm just being for purposes of clarity. I'm just letting you guys know, kind of what I did and what I didn't do. And you can feel free to run these numbers any way you want. This is all public data. You can grab the population reports. You can grab the Card Ladder pricing. You can put in your own. Of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This is an exciting time. Could be a dangerous time for people in the hobby. Anytime you have such acceleration in prices, I do get a little nervous. And I will also disclose I own all of these Messi cards and the CR7 cards. And actually, I even have, I don't currently own any of these other sport cards, although I think I've owned most of them. I do also have certain CR7 and Messi cards that I am selling or trying to sell on eBay, given the current prices, some of my duplicates. And I obviously have a very large personal collection of these cards in general. So take that for what you will. I just want to out, my biases there. So, it's meant to be, all of this analysis is meant to be just directional and give you comfort. Hey, is this a good point, an entry point to get in? Is this a dangerous entry point to get in? And a lot of that will depend on your own calibration of those things. So, you've got to calibrate your own thoughts. That's your responsibility. And again, not investment advice, but let's get into the data because I think this is the most fun part of the whole show. Okay. So here's the market cap by the iconic cards. And so, you've got here the 52 Mantle, you've got the 86 Fleer Jordan, you've got the Opeachy rookie from 79 for Gretzky, you've got Messi, and you have CR7 Mega Cracks. So, while this is not a full calibration, I'm going to call these cards. So whether you agree that, whether you're a Star fan or a Fleer fan, I'm just let's just go with this in terms of their best cards. Okay. You may prefer the stickers, for CR7 or Ronaldo, but the reality is they're at least certainly in the conversation of their best cards. Okay. So let's just look at this. Wow. When I first did this, I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, MJ and Mantle, which we already know are hobby stalwarts. Wow. Do they ever, just dwarf everything else. So this is just these cards. If you were to buy every single one that were existing and control the population, you would end up with these types of numbers, almost 400 million for the 52 Mantle, 350 for the MJ Fleer, and then it drops down considerably, less than 1/7 before you get to Gretzky, and then a little tick down 20% from there to get to the Messi Mega Cracks, and then a massive, more or less, what do you want to call it, 70, 65, 70% dump for CR7. So it certainly seems like CR7 is barely in the conversation of iconic cards when you look at this. And this is not necessarily the full calibration. I will say that the PSA 10 mantles, which you'll see in the appendix, I assumed a sales price of $20 million. Some people say it's $30 million. So I think the gap could even get bigger. But regardless of whether you believe that's 15, 20, 25, it doesn't change the magnitude here that we're talking about. So crazy. So then another reason why I picked these cards to look at was to say, okay, let's include their other key rookies, because most of these guys have two rookies. So in the case of, two elite rookies, one a little less. In the case of Mantle, it'll be, the 51 Bowman. In the case of Jordan, we'll take the Star. In the O-Pee-Chee, it has the Tops, version as well. Messi has the he has 11, and then CR7 has just the other Panini sticker. So let's just take a look with what happens when we add the second key rookie cards and all of the Messi rookies. So all of those mega cracks, Campeon, Campio, the other Mundi, the Mundi Chromo, and all those. So that's why you have here, if you want to look at my screen, I don't know if you can see this, I've got this plus 10 down here on Messi. So this is his 11 rookie cards, all of them. And the general trends don't change massively, right? When you kind of look at it, okay, so now we've got the two, maybe Mantle extends his lead a little bit, because the Bowman so desired, and PSA doesn't have a huge pop on the Star. Messi kind of ultimately closes the gap, a little bit. And if this is using the last public sale for the Messi PSA 10, which is in the 900,000 range. If you were to increase this to the 1.5 million private sale of what we would say is generally kind of a clean 10 for sure, you would actually have, Messi, and I'd have to have a small bump to the Este sticker. You would actually have Messi slightly higher than Gretzky. And I think this is kind of a key point. How do you feel about that, right? I mean, it kind of depends if you're a huge hockey fan or not, but do you feel uncomfortable? And this is kind of the crux of the discussion. Do you feel uncomfortable that the market sees Messi as important as Gretzky, at least from a rookie card perspective? And, I'd say, myself, Al, I would say that doesn't make me uncomfortable. That doesn't make me uncomfortable. Everything that he achieved, I mean, yes, Gretzky, was absolutely, amazing, but soccer is a much bigger sport. And I don't feel uncomfortable with him being in the realm either, but, less, like you can see on the last slide. Let's see if we get this. So he's less here by roughly 20%. He's less here by 10%. And if you go to the 1.5 million Messi Mega Cracks PSA 10, and I think 200 or so on the PSA 9, then he would actually be slightly above. So he's generally going to be in the realm no matter what numbers you use. And do you feel comfortable with that? And I think as of this point here, and it includes his 11 other rookie cards, I feel pretty good about that. Like I don't feel that that's crazy, right? And in a way, I kind of look over to the left and I say, man, what would I rather have? Would I rather, go big? And I know there's other reasons that the Mantle iconic set, just all the hobby lore for so much time. But would I rather have, Messi, given the macro dynamics for soccer, as opposed to Mantle? Especially, when you're looking at, less than, an 80% discount. I don't necessarily feel uncomfortable with that either, right? So, I feel like which one has relative upside versus downside, I'm generally going to pick pick the Messi, I think, here, which is kind of crazy because it's a 2004 card. So there's a little bit of um, apples and oranges going on here. Another kind of big thing is wow. I mean, I usually think of CR7 as, hey, if you can get him for 50% of what you can get a Messi, that's pretty good. I'm taking that bet all day long. I think there's been a long discussion for many years about whether he was better, certainly before he won the World Cup, if his body of work with all the Champions Leagues and the goals, outweighed Messi's, incremental, assists and flair. And then after the World Cup, I think most of that discussion went away. So it's fine. Okay, CR7 is a discount to Messi. How much of a discount? Gosh, this much of a discount? I don't know. That doesn't feel right to me, either. I feel like he should be much closer to Messi. Now, part of this is because he has fewer cards, right? He only has one card and one sticker. But the other, just even when you look at just the big cards, which I'll go back and show you this. Look at that. It's still a 70. It's still 25% of the Messi, right? Okay. So anyway, so this is what happens when you add the second key rookie, right? You end up with this kind of a dynamic, and this would, at least at a high level, the way I see things, denote that, man, certainly CR7 looks pretty undervalued or underappreciated by the market. Messi, at least fairly, maybe some upside. And depending on how you feel about, MJ and Mantle, maybe if I could, buy some puts, I'd think about it on those cards. But anyway, let's go to the third view here that I have. Now let's look just at the absolute premium level of the cards. And again, and what's the premium level do I mean? Just the PSA 9s and 10s. So I'm going to assume here, there's a few assumptions because the 10 Mantle hasn't traded, and I put in $20 million. That could easily be $30 million. So regardless, what you're going to see here is Jordan ends up being slightly higher than Mantle. In actuality, I think if we went to auction, probably Mantle would still hold the mantle, so to speak. But there's still, what happens now is the gap changes dramatically here, and you get such a massive disproportion of the value of the 71 bis in the 9s and the 10s versus what you see in Gretzky and Ronaldo. And again, does this make you feel uncomfortable? Well, a little bit more. Could I say that Messi is 4 times as great as Gretzky? 4 times as more important as Gretzky with all his 9s and 10s versus Gretzky's 9s and 10s. I would say, a little, but the devil's in the details. Gretzky's pops are super low in 9s and 10s. And I would almost say that this opened my eyes to say, dang, high grade Gretzky's are undervalued. And certainly the gap with CR7 gets even larger between Messi. So that doesn't feel great to me. I definitely, if I'm a buyer of 9s and 10s, I feel like based on this analysis, at least, the right-hand side of the slide, Gretzky and CR7, seems a safer value play than the left-hand side, and the one in the middle is probably okay-ish with a slight bias to down. That's at least how I read this data. You can read this, anyway. But the shocking dynamic here. Let's go back to the last slide. As you can see, Messi at the highest level, Gretzky is worth more in aggregate on the single most important card than the 71 bis. Fine. Then you say, okay, include all the other rookies. It's still worth more. if you did put the 71 bis at 1.5 million and the PSA 9 at a couple 100,000, you would then slightly be more. The Messi would be slightly be more. Okay, that's fine. Feels about right to me. And then boom, let's just look at the 9s and 10s at the 1.5 million and the 200,000. And now, how do I feel? Now I feel that whoa, the Gretzky's on a relative basis are undervalued versus the Messi. Still maybe absolutely fair prices for the Messi, but they certainly feel undervalued. And the CR7 feels incredibly undervalued when looking at things on this nature. Now, is it unfair that I'm including 11 different Messi rookie cards versus 2 CR7s? You decide. You can cut the math and do it your own way. But the reality is most of the value is in the 71 bis. You can see here, just to go back, 41 millions in the 71 bis and 75 million total. Okay. So, so what does this mean to me? Well, fundamentally, in aggregate, when you look at it from every possible perspective, Messi doesn't feel super overvalued to me. Versus some of the other epic cards, in the hobby. It kind of he feels roughly in line with what I would expect. And so even at these high prices relative to what we have seen historically, but importantly, there are a ton of other premium Messi cards out there. And I was thinking, man, how many other great Gretzky cards are there? Yeah, he's got OPG and tops, and yes, he's got some after career stuff, but not a lot. And I can think of tons of autographs and prisms and tops chrome and so many Messi cards out there that are incredibly valuable. And so I think if you were to do this with all of the cards, even though Messi's pop in general, when you look at his pop of graded cards, it's crazy how low this is relative to greats. But when you look at all of those cards together, my guess is it's going to dwarf someone like Gretzky. So in that respect, you say, hey, the aggregate Messi cards out there, how do you feel about that? Well, okay, but not great, right? And part of it is because we're comparing, through eras. But even when you do this type of analysis with, for instance, Ovechkin, a guy who has rookie cards in the same era, but he has some, RPA type, really, really premium, nice, rookie cards. You're going to generally feel good about where kind of Messi and certainly Ronaldo, sit in that. So next kind of point that I want to bring up is I think that CR7 feels very undervalued, to me. And I was thinking the other day, man, Portugal's got a great team. What if, and some really, really, I think they had a couple guys in the top 10 in Ballon d'Or voting. Not that the Ballon d'Or's kind of lost different video. It's lost some of its shine for me, certainly over the last 4 to 5 years. But like Vitinha, I mean, what if CR7 pulls out a World Cup win? I mean, he has the Euro, he blows away in Champions League, the goals, man, it just feels like incrementally there's some really good upside. So, interestingly, which you'll see in the appendix, I also pulled the Pele 1958 Alifa, which most people would say is a stalwart Pele, rookie card. Whether it should be or not, that's another video. But it's roughly at the same level as the CR7 rookies. So we could extend, not using all of the Pele rookies as an example, but we could generally extend, and that's, by the way, putting a PSA 9 Alifa at $1 million valuation, which right now that it would probably sell for less than that, even though the top was 1.3. I'm going to guess it would probably sell for less than that. But on a relative basis, the Pele Alifa, man, looks and feels very similar to the CR7, right? So, So I think that's also, interesting. Fundamentally, your kind of calibration point here is, depending on how you're looking at it, was CR7 or is CR7 should be worth 25% of Messi? I would probably argue more. That's how I get to the undervalued. If you think that he's less, should be, have a 90% discount to Messi, then you think CR7's overvalued. For me, you know, 50-60% of Messi feels right to me, or even more. I could make a case with some incremental upside. But if you're in a different camp than that, then you're going to feel like he is not undervalued. But that's how I feel, at least based on this data. Most of the 9-10 ratios appear, in line with other Epic guys, but there's a real heightened curve here. You know, partly because I think the pop report is super flat on the Messis. I think the median grade on a Messi, maybe a PSA 6, 71 bis, meaning that if you have a 7, you have a top 50% Messi, right? So that's something that is part of the reason. And in aggregate, you were seeing, depending on these Epic cards, a 10 to 30% increase by grade on the multipliers. The multipliers are very interesting when you dive into the data here. I couldn't help, and you'll have to excuse my vintage bias here, but I certainly couldn't help with my biggest conclusion of all, and it has nothing to do with any of the cards that I put on the slides here. It's basically that I think that almost every vintage card, especially of the top 20 players, and even pre-modern stars, seem crazy undervalued relative to the basketball, baseball, and football equivalents. Like, so when you start to look at the super low, pops on, you probably can't see this, but Ronaldinho, rookies, or Zidane rookies, or Van Basten, rookies, or you start to go back in time and you say, wow, elite, Mesa cards, you've got some awesome Sindelar card, just when you start to actually look at these on a pop perspective, I mean, they don't even register. So I think that's my biggest conclusion, that is just more fuel to the fire of why I think elite rare cards of elite players of all time just have so much more upside than downside. And they haven't run to the extent that Messi and CR7 have either. So but all that being said, there's absolutely no guarantee that the demand for soccer will materialize over time. When I say demand for soccer, I'm meaning soccer cards. I mean, yes, I don't think there's any way that soccer becomes, at least during my lifetime, not the number one sport in the world. But I just don't think that we can count on endless supply of newcomers to the space to continue to drive demand. So that is unsure. I think that incrementally I would expect more. How much more remains to be seen, but the supply side being one thing, the demand side is the most important piece, which is why you see the MJ rookies and the Mantle rookies being so valuable, because there's just so much demand despite really large populations. So I found this very interesting, insightful. Found myself looking it's for some Gretzky rookies, frankly. But I'm sure that it also begs a lot of other questions, and I'll look into those. I think one in particular that came up, which I'll try to do a video this week if I can, is on my preference based on the market caps of the relative Messi cards, the 11 rookie cards, which I know others have talked about the preferences. I've talked about my preferences, but let's dive into the data a little more and look at that. So here is, you probably can't read this, but here is kind of the data where I'm showing, look at this. I mean, some of the things that jumped out is there's only 2 PSA 10 Gretzky Opeachis. and there's only 179 tops. So this goes back to how his 9s and 10s are not very valuable. I mean, not very common, making them in aggregate worth less. But and that compares to Messi. He has 20 71 bis and 10 of the stickers. So you can see that how that kind of moves the data. In total, think about this: the MJ Fleer has 28,000 cards graded, and even the Gretzky Opeachy has 14,000. The Tops has 10. The Mantle has almost 2,000. The Bowman has 2,500. The Messi 71 bis only 900. Right. So unless we think that there's a tremendous amount of 71 bisses coming to the market, and because they're ungraded, I just not sure that this is going to change dramatically. So, I think these are pretty good numbers. I mean, even if the 71 bis goes up by, 50%, the pops on the mantles and the Jordans are still increasing, as well. So, order of magnitude, that in and of itself is not going to close the gap here. And you can see here on the slide, like I originally mentioned, some of the numbers that I kind of had to extrapolate. These purple ones, the green ones you'll see here, I put, well, you probably can't see because there's so many numbers on this. I put over here the 1.5 million price for the 71 bis and overriding the 900. In my original slide, I'm using that last public sale. But in this data set, I just wanted to show you what I was using here. I'm using a 75 for the 10 Este sticker, which one hasn't traded recently, and there was a 10 for the 9, although there was a recent sale on eBay for 16,000 for the S8 9. So again, the data wobbles. You can change this all. You can put in your own numbers and try to run some sensitivities. In the end, when I did it, it didn't change things from a macro perspective at all. Also here, what you see is I've got the Pele here. This is the Alifa. If I used $1 million for the 6.9s there, you'd end up with 12 million in Alifas, which is nearly the same number as the 2002 Mega Cracks CR7. So in the end, who do you prefer, Pele or CR7? If that was Pele's only rookie card, that would be a clear no-brainer for me. It would be, Pele. If it's, CR7, given that he only has 2, I don't know, you could probably make a case for either one. It would be fun, and I could do that in a different video to run out all the Pele numbers and see, since he has many more rookies, and compare that to Messi. But I think we already know the answer to that, because all the other ones are not nearly as valuable as the Alifa and have lower pops than the Alifa, most of them outside of the 58 Aquarella. And so ultimately Pele is going to be considerably less than Messi. And the question is, how do you feel about that? And certainly if you included the other cards from Messi's career, which by the way are cooler, I love nothing like Soul of the Game, beautiful auto with beautiful game used material. That's fantastic. Pele doesn't have that stuff. So in the end, make your own conclusions. Certainly, I believe that this type of analysis should be helpful to most people, to help just calibrate. Do I feel good about my entry point? And I think if you were watching my videos the last couple of years, I think I said on multiple occasions, you probably would feel good about your entry point for Messi over the last couple of years. And guess what? You did. If you put some money in there, you probably made 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 times your money, depending on which cards you put. From here, where do I incrementally put money? Probably, at least of these players and these cards, probably CR7 or high grade Gretzky. That's what came out of the data for me, boys and girls. If something else comes out, follow your own advice. follow your own analysis, enjoy your collecting career. It's not all about the dollars and cents. So definitely do that. If you happen to like this video, if you can smash that like button, you can subscribe. Again, I'll try to look at some messy things here over the next week or so, and hope everybody keeps enjoying their collecting. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.